Okay, so we are on the bottom of Pei Dalet and Bet onto Pei Hayim and Aleph. So we're starting a new case. Yeah, we were talking about shared property, and the question is who ends up getting the rights to it, and how. Yeah, assuming you didn't remember to make a joint eruv, you made a joint eruv, everything's easy, no worries. But if you didn't plan ahead, you didn't make your eruv, what are we allowed to do? What can't we do? So Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel Bor Shebein Shtei Chatzerot Uflaget Mikotel Ze Arba Mikotel Ze Arba'a Ze Motzi Ziz Kol Shu Malay Ze Motzi Ziz Kol Shu Malay. Okay, so we're gonna this definitely is a picture going to help a lot with this one. So we have two different houses. There's a common cistern in between the two of them. Okay. So again, so that's the diagram right over here. So we got the side view, and we've got the overhead view. Okay, so the question is, how do each of them end up accessing the cistern? So we say each of them have to stick out some form of remember we did before about the shelf, right? That's sticking out of the wall, some sort of ziz, and it's some sort of outcropping. They need to fix that by their window, and then they can throw their bucket in and draw water and bring it back up. Also note this is through the window. This is not them walking down and accessing it. This is them doing it through the window, which will be relevant in terms of the heter. Okay, so that's the mitziut of the case. So now let's get into talking a little bit more about the why. Okay, so the Rav Yehuda Didei Amar Afilu Kanya, and Rav Yehuda says, actually, all you need. So yeah, so the first thing we have is Shmuel. You need to put that a nice. You need to stick out that little ledge, that outcropping. And Rav Yehuda says no. As long as you put a stick out to show that you're not So what is the goal of the stick or the ledge? Is to say that you are not currently taking advantage of the ability to use the rishus. Rather, you're just accessing the water. You don't mean to create any issues of like I own it and he doesn't own it. You're trying to avoid saying that I'm in control. You're saying that all I'm doing is taking the water out, and that's it. And that's why you put this little either the stick or the board. So Amar Le Abai Rav Yosef Hadar Yehuda Dishmueli. So Abai told Rav Yosef, saying that Rav Yehuda is basically the same thing as what Shmuel had said. Because if he had held like Rav instead of like Shmuel, Ha Amar Ein Adam Osera Chavero Derech Havir, because this has to be within Shmuel's opinion, because according to Rav, you can't forbid somebody else's usage just by using the airspace. So that's why in this case it wouldn't be a difference. So therefore, if it was according to Rav, so according to Shmuel, it says that use of airspace is relevant for control of that Reshut HaYachid. So Udi Shmuel, so how does Shmuel know that there's a how do this is Shmuel's opinion that if you have that airspace could control multiple people is problematic? How do we? I understand you say you're using the ground, right? That makes a lot of sense. But what about this whole airspace thing? How does that work with the airspace? So let's continue on. So Yilema Mihad Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel Gag Hasamoch Reshut Harabim Sarich Sulam Kavul Hatiro. So if you want to quote the case we ended off on yesterday, where you have the roof is adjacent to the Reshut Harabim. We have another photo here, so I'll scroll back on up. Right, so we have the roof. There's the Rabim there is nice and close. So it's like there they should, because Reshut Harabim has access to the roof. We say that you have to put a fixed ladder to the courtyard to make sure that, or again, the ladder goes to the courtyard or to the Reshut Harabim. The point is to differentiate the.
You're breaking up quite a bit. It's been.
So
you're breaking up quite a bit.
okay, so I'll take a step back. Okay, so okay, so
Yeah.
so we were trying to figure. So we were talking about. So the first case we started with was people trying to access the cistern between two different windows, as far away from both windows, at least 4 tvachim. So it's considered to be a separate reshut and not connected to either window. So say in order to access it, you're supposed to make put out a stick or a board in order to say that you are accessing the water, but you're not taking control of this alleyway or this reshut yachid between the two buildings. So the question, so we said this comes down to a question of airspace, and if you're using the air, does that make it a problem or not? So now we're trying to find. So we said that Shmuel's opinion says that if you have use of the airspace, that means that you control the whole space. So we're trying to figure out where do we figure that out? Where is the source that we know that is Shmuel's opinion? So we said we learned it from the last case from yesterday of where you have a roof next to Rishut Rabim, and you either need to put a ladder on the roof to differentiate the roof from the Rishut Rabim. So let's look at Rishonim, whether or not the place you place the ladder is on the side of the Chatzer to show that the real people who are supposed to have access is the Chatzer, not Rishut Rabim. The other opinion is you put the ladder by Rishut Rabim because that way you're showing the people that, hey, this is somebody's property, and they plan on accessing it that way. So you shouldn't be using that roof because it's clearly somebody's who's using it. Okay, so that's the difference. Which way do you do it, right? Okay, so this is one option again, right? And then the other option, right? So that was one way of solving it. And the other way of solving it is that you have the ladder is by Rishut Rabim. I don't think there's a picture of that here, but again, those are the two ways you could have solved from yesterday. So the point there is that you have to show some way that you have control of the area, because the fact that the Rishut Rabim is having access to it generates issues for you. So that's Shmuel's source. Okay. It needs to be a fixed ladder, because if it's a temporary ladder, that wouldn't be sufficiently showing your control of the area. So Dilma could Rapapa. So maybe we could understand it in terms of Rapapa, because Rapapa mentioned the case of you put your hat on the you end up putting your hat on top of the roof, your hat or your scarf, and the issue is not that the shared use of the airspace. The issue is that people are actually using your roof. So therefore, it's not a question of people using the airspace that's conflicting. That's an issue of they're actually using your roof, which is a bigger problem. So therefore, that wouldn't necessarily teach about airspace. So now let's try and figure out another source that use of airspace means that it can create other problems for us. So Elamiha. So we're trying to extrapolate from our case of you're required to put the ledge of some size sticking out of your window in order to be able to fill up through your window. So Tama da'apik. So why do you need the ledge? That's because, right, so the ledge is what's allowing you to draw water. But had lo apik, arinan adam osra chavero dar chavir. So here, the fact that you need to build any structure here, you can't simply say that they're both lowering out the windows. So how does that show anything to do about their control over the cistern? So therefore, it must be that the fact that we make you put the extra ledge is indicating that use of the airspace generates an issue. So actually, we can apply it from our statement Shmuel here, and that's perfectly fine. And we say that the reason why you put the ziz isn't to serve as a hecker, rather it's to serve as a way of preventing you from running into issues of airspace. Okay. And let's see, I just cut out again. So, okay, the last thing I mentioned was about the airspace. Hopefully everybody heard that point. That again, that the reason why you put the ledge is because of the airspace. So we could have had other reasons why you did it, but we're concluding that the reason is really because of the airspace. Okay. I heard a beep from my computer, so I just wanted to mute that. Okay. Udarav Mehechan. How about Rav, who says there's no issue? How do you know that he doesn't think there's a problem of mutually used airspace? So, Ilema Miha, maybe he learns it from this case. Shtei Guzus Taraot, Zol Mal Mizu. Yeah, so this is again from yesterday's Gemara, where we have two balconies, one on top of the other. Here, let me scroll back on up. We have a picture down here. Nope, the other wrong direction. Okay, so here we go. This one. Here's we have the two balconies. Okay, so again, these are very basic balconies. They don't have any fancy walls around them. If they did, that would be an entirely different case. So, meaning because yeah. Anyways, so there are currently then only one of them has a wall for drawing of water. Again, that's the case from yesterday. If only the upper balcony made the wall to allow for drawing of water from below, neither of them can use the balcony to draw water unless they have made an Eruv to allow them to use it, because the fact that the other person would end up wanting to use the other person's walls would generate a problem. So Amar of Huna Amar Rav, and how to know the Rav's opinion is that shared airspace is a problem? There isn't a problem, because he doesn't say the issue is no matter how far away they are, as long as you can throw a bucket in, as long as you can as long as you've got good enough hand-eye coordination to throw the basket in, you're good. It's like no, you have to actually be close. Amar of Huna Amar Rav lo shanu ela besmucha aval muflaget arba'a elyona mutar tachtona sira. So again, here Rav says that that's only relevant if they're right next to each other. Right, you share a balcony. You basically more or less share a balcony. There's like a little gap in between. So if the gap is again 4 tvachim, which is really not which is a foot, third of a meter, really not that big of a gap. So again, that's enough of a gap that way you could easily get over to the other person's porch, put your water down, bring it back up. So, but again, once you have logically considered to be separated, then that's what matters. Right, so then even though you could definitely use Tashmisha Derech Avir, you could definitely use the airspace to drop your bucket down through the other well on his side, like his shaft. But here we're saying that it will be allowed. So therefore, that means that Rav holds that shared airspace isn't an issue. So the Gemara rejects this, right? Dilma Shani Hacha. The Kevin de Lazeb is Rika, Vishulshul, Lazeb is Shulshul Hudei, Kilazeb is Rika, Lazeb, Petaptami. No, the that case is different because there, one of them can access the water via either by throwing or by lowering, whereas the other one can only do it via, the other one can access it via just lowering, and lowering is much easier than having to throw your bucket over, get it in, have it land in the shaft, and then draw the water is much more difficult than simply lowering down the bucket. So therefore, you might say that it's comparable to the case of one person has access rights via throwing, whereas one person has rights via actually walking right in through a doorway. So that's what we'd say, that maybe Rav's, that's not necessarily conclusive. So Ela Meha. So rather, we'll learn that from another case as well. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Bar Avua, Amar Rav. Okay, so we'll learn out from this other case that Rav was quoting the name of Rabbah and the name of Rav. Okay, so let me get so we have Shnei Batim L'Shalosh Chorvot Benehem. We have 2 houses and 3 abandoned houses in the middle of them. Let's get down to the picture here, because this will be, whenever we have multiple physical structures, it gets a little weird. But here we go. Okay. So we've got 2 houses, one on the right, one on the left. Okay, we're dealing with right now. We're looking at picture number 57. There will be other diagrams relevant as well. For now, we're focusing on the top one right there. Okay. So Zeh mishtamesh b'samuch shelo ayidei zrika, v'zeh mishtamesh b'samuch shelo ayidei zrika. L'emtzai asur. So each of them can utilize the empty abandoned building next to them, again, via their window, but only while they are using, but only by throwing. But that's only for the one closest to them. But for the one that's in the middle, that's forbidden. Okay, because this one is clearly relevant to the person on the left. This one is clearly relevant to the person on the right. And the middle one, they both have equal rights to, which then means that if you didn't make an Eruv, it's usher. So then the Gemara, so then the Gemara continues that Yativ Rabruna Lakamar Lashmadata. So Rabruna stated this halacha, the name of Rav, in the base of Midrash one day. And then what happens? Amr le Rabbi Eliezer bar Rav. And then along comes Rabbi Eliezer, who is a student, is one of the students, and says, right, he himself was a student of Rav, and so he says, Amar Rav Hachi, wait, did Rav really say this? Amar le'im. So he says, yes, I heard this from him. So this is what Rav definitely said. Like I'm sure this is what was quoted in his name. So Achve li ushpizi. So then Rabbi Eliezer said, if that's the case, show me where Rav lives. I want to check if this is really what Rav really meant what he meant for this case, because it doesn't make sense to me. So So Rabruna showed him where Rav lives. Made Rav, Amar Hachi, Amar in. So then he goes over and he checks and says, did you really say this? And then Rav says, yep. So seemingly that's the end of the story. But again, that's not it. This is definitely teaching us that you should do, if you hear something that sounds a little bit off from somebody, it might be a good idea to go and ask them in person to make sure that you fully understood it. So as we'll see here, right? So Amar Lei, Vaha, Mar Huda Amar, Lazeb Ishilshul, Lazeb Izrikash, Neem Asarin. Wait, so then the question is, why is that? Didn't you say that if two people have access to the same area, one of whom can access it via lowering, one of whom can access it via throwing, that both of them aren't allowed to access it? So in terms of our ability to use this area, so we should say it's a problem because, and then diagram, in diagram 57, right? That's a problem because again, one of those is Zrika, one of them you can access, but you just have to have pull it all the way really far across via a rope, which would be considered to be like shilshul, right? Lowering also shalshal is also a chain. So those would all be issues that you would have to be dealing with. Okay, so Amar Lei, so the Rav said back to him, Mi savart tekaimi kashura, lo tekaimi kachatzuva. So then the Rav says back to him, wait a minute, what's the problem? Wait, I know what the issue is. You thought that the rooms are arranged in a row, right? That's diagram number 57. Rather, what is the order? The order is diagram 59. That it's actually shaped like a tripod. Okay, so we see how there's these three rooms, right? Okay, so again, this is the side view. This is the overhead view. So we've got a house on the right, we have a house on the left. Then we have one courtyard that's forbidden. That's the one they both have direct access to, right? That's one of the abandoned buildings that they both have direct access to, right? The churba, this red building. So that's the one they both have equal access to. And then there's the one over here, which is closer to the house on the right. And then there's the other little bit, which is closer to the house on the left. So that's how it'll work out, because that's saying that each of them have, again, there's two that are clearly closer to one of them in terms of usage, and that's why it's considered to be relevant to each of them. But then there's of the building that both have exactly equal access to. That's the one that's going to be forbidden. But the rest, if one of them has a preferential access point, then that would be different. Okay. So. Okay, and that's how we solve the issue, right? And that's how, again, Rabruna gets his answer, and all is well. So it's always important if something sounds like you don't understand it. It's always a good idea to go ask, because there's very good odds that you will get a full answer and you'll walk away understanding as opposed to being confused.
So, Rabbi, I don't understand. Why do they have access? Why is the one forbidden and the two at the bottom accessible to them?
Okay, so because here, so you see how there's each house has two windows on the side over here.
Right.
So 1, 2. Okay, same on this side here. We got about the 1 and we've got 2. And then what we do is, so we see where it says, so the area where see where the little dollars are. This shared room, again, nobody's currently living in this room. It's a chorba. It's an abandoned structure. So nobody's using this area here. So here, both of them have a window with direct access to it, which means that they both have equal rights to access this area, and usage is equally convenient to both. Therefore, it's forbidden. Right? Because when two people have access to the same, again, courtyard. Normally we say this, we talk about courtyard, but here it also applies to this abandoned structure that they're using as if it's their extra courtyard. Right, so this is the abandoned lot, so each one of them want to use it. So since they each have equal access to it, neither of them gets outright control and is left in, and since it's disputed, therefore it needs an Eruv for them both to be able to use it. It needs an Eruv Chatzerot. Conversely, didn't mean to have the whole thing. So then we have this room over here, right? This little room here, the bed on the left. So this room is right next to the person on the left's house, and you can access it via his window, right? And therefore, he has the easier access, right? He can lower things in or throw things in there, and it's considered to be more useful for him. Whereas the person on the right, it's a much farther distance, and there's also as you see from the picture here, there's also a separate room here, right? There's a wall. Probably not a fully complete wall because there's some way of access between these two. So then this person could access this room as well, but it would be much more difficult because he has to bypass this whole room, and he can only access it from his window. So he can't, go walk on over here because this is right. He only allowed to access through the window. So for instance, he's going out the window and then through this little doorway over here. If you can see a little better in this diagram over here, see that so over here. So in the upper diagram. Right, so the room on the left goes to the person on the left. The room on the right goes to the individual on the right, because it's simply closer and easier access and easier usage for that person. And then, but whereas the room in the back, since they both have equal access, they both forbid it on each other. So we have the general rule that when you have an area that is easier, and there's then one is clearly easier and better usage, we say that the area goes to the person with the easier, better way of using it than the other one. Okay? So that's the way that you would do it, and that's and that would be the rule. Again, so it makes it look, in this case, it's much easier to see how one is exactly both have equal rights, whereas one is debatable, as opposed to the case we had above, where again, so you can make sense why each of these is a little more accessible, but on the other hand, they're all basically accessed the same way via shilshul, by lowering or by using or by throwing for both of them, and it's unclear how to differentiate between all three of these areas because they all look pretty similar in their usages, as opposed to here where there's quite clearly when it's in the tripod shape. It's quite clear that one of them has exactly equal usage, right? And direct equal usage, as opposed to in the middle case where it's both indirect equal usage, and you'd be like, well, why? And it is a little more confusing. Here, it's more clear why it belongs to one or the other, right? So that.
Rabbi, I think the pictures are really breaking you up. I think the pictures are really breaking you up.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, so I'll stop sharing and I'll share when we get to the next picture then, okay? Okay, so Okay, so again, so we mentioned that based on whichever window is closest to you, that's the relevant point. The that again, the room that's closest to you is your room. The other one is not. Okay. So now let's continue with the next little bit of the Gemara. So Amar le Rav Papa l'Rava. So Rav Papa said to Rava, Lema Shmuel le Rav Imi. So I think that Shmuel doesn't hold of what Rav Dimi had said. T'chiata Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, as Rav Dimi had quoted in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Makom she'ein bo arba al arba mutar livnei reshut harabim livnei reshut hayachid l'chatef alav l'vad shelo yachlifu. So Shmuel, who says that, again, who we mentioned before, who has a problem of use of the airspace, right, accessing the air, generates an issue. So he doesn't have that of the opinion of Rav Dimi in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, who says that if the area is less than 4, everybody can use it as long as they're not trading with each other, right? People in the private domain or the public domain can both use it in order to, like, in order to adjust their packages. Just they can't trade packages. So, according to Shmuel, that'll be a problem because 2 people are using the same area, which should render it forbidden. But here we're saying that it's not an issue. So Hatam, so then now we're saying maybe that's then Rava responds back, maybe that's not the case, because Hatam Rishuyo Deoraita, Hacha Rishuyo Derabanan. No, the difference there between the Rishut Yachid and the Rishut Rabim is by different areas on a Deoraita level, on a biblical level. But here in our case of the in our case, it's only, again, we're talking about the airspace between 2 private domains, whether we're accessing the water, we're accessing the destroyed abandoned buildings, or if we're accessing the cistern. Those are all Rishut Yachid, so therefore it would not be the same. It would not be, the cases would not be comparable. Okay. Okay. So the Chachamim asu chizik l'divrayim yoter mishal Torah. So why are we more strict in our case than we are by the case of everybody being allowed to adjust their packages on that wall, if the wall, or on the pillar because it's so small. So you say Chachamim asu chizik l'divrayim yoter mishal Torah, that the Chachamim, for Dinamid Rabbanan, people are often lax about them and they don't observe them properly. So that's why the shared usage of the space is more problematic on Derabanan level than on Deraita level. So Amrle Ravina Larava. Mi Amarav Hachi. So now we're questioning, does Rav really say that that airspace isn't going to be a problem? Baha Idmar, but didn't we have the case of Shnei Batim, Mishnei Tidei Rabin? If you have 2 houses on 2 sides of the public thoroughfare, Rabba Bar Huna Amar Rav, Astur Lizrog Mizet Lizet. So Rav Huna quotes, Rabba, the son of Rav Huna, quotes Rav, saying you can't throw from one side of the Rishut Rabim to the other side of Rishut Rabim, right? No playing catch across the street, right? Even though you're both standing in Rishut Yachid, right, in your own houses, you still can't play catch. Shmuel Amar Mutar Lizrok Mizet Lizet. Right, so Rav is the one who says that it's problematic to throw between, again, via forbidden airspace, whereas Shmuel says that it's allowed. So this seemingly is actually the opposite of their opinion we had before. So now we're just confused. So Amrlei La Miyukimna Midali Chad Mitat Echad Zimna de Migan Dervinapil V'ati Letuye. No, we said there that's not the issue. The issue there is that one house is a little bit higher or a little bit lower, and in terms of, like, there's a little bit of a slope in between. So what'll happen is you throw from one to the other one, and you might end up dropping the item, and it'll roll back, and then somebody will go and pick it up, and then they'll notice you're playing catch on the ball, or you were throwing, you wanted an orange for dessert, so you ask your neighbor, you have an orange, and they throw it over. But it might have fell, and if it fell, somebody might go into the street to pick it up, and if they did that, then they would have violated an Isur Midoraita. And because we don't want somebody to do that, Rav said you can't carry, whereas Shmuel wasn't concerned about people being bad at throwing things. So it's a question of what are you worried about, but it's not a question of does usage of the airspace generate a problem halakhically or not. Okay. So again, just to do it. Okay, so let's just sum what we did until we'll go to the Mishnah. Just so again, I'm going to share screen again. Hopefully, it won't cut out. I just want to show the pictures because we covered quite a few today. So before we get to the next case, so again, we are talking. Okay, so the last thing in terms of these, again, this is these are trying to throw from house to house and over the Rabim, and not always necessarily being a good job at it. So he threw it and it dropped down and landed in the yard. So somebody might go out of their house to pick it up, and then when they pick it up and bring it back inside, then they violated Isur D'Oraisa, which we don't want. Okay, so the other cases we mentioned were the cases of, we spoke about the accessing from the roof to the Shitra Rabim and how you're supposed to make a differentiation between them so we don't run into any potential issues of joint usage. We also discussed the case of the cistern between the two and how by putting either a board or a reed that allows this usage. And we also discussed the case of the destroyed building and how depending on where depending on the ease of access from each person in the left house versus the right house and how that plays out, and we concluded how the case was actually the one in the tripod on the case on the bottom, where the house that you have easier access to is the one that you get, whereas the one that you don't have easier access to is not that one. Okay, so now we're heading on to the Mishnah again. So we're going to move on to the diagram. These diagrams on the left over here. Okay. So notin et eruvo bebeit sha'ar afsadra merpeset eno eruv. If you were to have placed your eruv in the gatehouse, in the portico, or which is also a hallway, or the merpeset, meaning on the balcony. Eno eruv. The eruv, if you place an eruv there, it doesn't work. Because eruv has to be placed in a place where you actually live. Hadar sham, and if you happen to be residing there, eno moser alav. And if, let's say, somebody happens to be spending Shabbos camped out on somebody else's porch, all right, that's where they are. So we say that they're not considered to be a relevant party in terms of us during everybody else's usage of a courtyard because they don't really live there because that's not a valid place to be living. Beit HaTeven, Ubeit HaBakar, Ubeit HaEtzim, Ubeit HaOtzarot, Harei Ze Eruv, Hadar Sham Oser. But if you have a storage house for grain, a barn, a wood storage house, or a general storage unit, and you were to place your Eruv in any of those locations, it would be a valid Eruv because those are places where you could theoretically live. Similarly, Hadar Sham Oser. Similarly, if somebody were to have been taking up shop and living there for Shabbos, you have to account for him in terms of the usage of the Chatzer, and he has to be included in your Eruv for your Eruv to work. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Im yesh sham tfisat yad shabal habayit eino oser. Now here's a very important statement of Rabbi Yehuda. It says that if the owner of the hay shed already has usage rights, let's say somebody like there's the primary owner of the whole courtyard, and he has there's a house as well as a storage unit on the property. So there's somebody who's living in the house, and there's somebody living in the storage unit. But as long as the owner of the house still has control over the storage unit and has a place reserved for him, then that'll allow your usage. Okay. Okay, so here we have a picture of the gatehouse. We have a picture of the portico or of the pergola, or again, for which word you think this thing most likely is. Depends on where you live and which is your favorite word for this type of structure. The point being that this is not a place where people actually normally live. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing so that will, because there's no more pictures, it's just topics to discuss. Okay. So now the Gemara is gonna get into explaining why each of these are issues or not issues. So Amar of Yehuda, Breder of Shmuel Bar Shela. So Rav Yehuda said as follows: Kol makom she'amru hadar sham eno oser hanotenet erevo eno eruv chutz mi Beit sha'ar diachid. So any place that if you would have lived there, it wouldn't be a valid place. It wouldn't count towards forbidding everybody else from usage of the courtyard. Then if you place your eruv there, it wouldn't work. The one exception being if it was a gatehouse belonging to one individual, because that we say is considered to be a valid, potential valid place of residence. So then also any place which is invalid to place an eruv, meaning because it is valid to place the items that you're going to store for the shituf of Vo'ot, except for the airspace of an alleyway, right? Chutz me'avir mavoy. So why would that be the case? So again, the logic behind here is that if you're joining if you're trying to join the usage of the courtyard together, it has to be placed, the air has to be placed on one level down. Right, so if you're trying to do an eruv chatzerot, so the placement of the eruv has to be in something that is considered to be a house, right? Because again, so the most private thing is the house. Then comes the courtyard. Then comes the alleyway. Then comes the public thoroughfare. So so in order to treat the whole courtyard as a house, you need to have the eruv placed in a house. In order to treat when we do the shituf of Vo'ot, right? We get the partnership of the alleyways. So for that, you have to have placed the items for the shituf in at least in an area as private as a chatzer. So again, it could be in a chatzer or it could be in a house, one of the two. Okay, but if you would have placed the shituf for the mavoy inside the mavoy, it wouldn't work. Just like you placed your eruv chatzerot inside of in the courtyard itself, but not in one of the houses, it also wouldn't work. So now my kamash malan. So now we're trying to see what is this teaching us? Tanina, we already learned it. We learned this in the Mishnah already. That hanojenet erevo bebeit sha'ar achsader merpeset eno eruv. Erev hu delo have ha shituf have. So we're saying, what is new taught to us by this statement we just had over here? We knew this based on the Mishnah already, which talks about saying that if it's not a valid place for a BAYT or not a valid place to be living, it's not a valid house. That's why the gatehouse and the portico, the balcony are no good for placing your eruv. Right, and if you can't place an eruv there, of course you can't place then how could a shituf, right? So if it's no good for one, why do we give the other one? Like, I don't understand. So why do we need both cases? Because of Beit sha'ar diachid, because of the gatehouse belonging to an individual. Vavir de mavoy is and to exclude the case of the mavoy. So what does that mean? The lot's not, because the case of the mavoy wasn't mentioned. So therefore, it teaches both those cases of the fact that if you have a gatehouse owned by an individual, it is valid, as well as by the fact that if you have that you can't place the shituf v'vo'ot in the mavoy, it has to be in the courtyard. That's what we're learning based on having both of these statements. So Tanya Namihachi learned similarly in another Braita. Hanoden et eruvo bebeit sha'ar achsad merpeset v'chatzer v'mavoy harei ze eruv. We learned elsewhere that if you placed an eruv in a gatehouse, portico or balcony, or in the courtyard or in the mavoi, is considered to be an eruv. So now we're like, wait, this seems to go exactly against what we just did. The hatanan, ein ze eruv. But we just said in the Mishnah that those are not valid places for an eruv. What's going on? Ema harei ze shituf. You're right. That was a mistake. The words we meant to say is that it's a shituf. But again, that still doesn't work because shituf mavoi lo mintar. If you put the area of the shituf, if you put the shituf in, if you put the items meant for the partnership inside of a mavoi, it's not properly guarded. So therefore, that can't mean that, right? It still doesn't make sense. We know that you can't place the items for the shituf mavoi inside of the mavoi. It needs to be placed inside a chatzer. So no, ema b'chatzer sheba mavoi. No, when the Beit said mavoi meant a courtyard adjoining the alleyway, and that's how it would work. Okay. I don't think we have enough time to do the next. Okay, so we'll see if we got 2 minutes. Okay, so let's try and quickly do the next cases. If we might just get the last sum up, we'll start with that tomorrow. Okay, so Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, B'nei Chabura Shahayu B'subim V'Kiddush Aleim Hayom Pachal Shulchan Samchin Aleim Mishum Eruv V'Amri La Mishum Shituf. If people are having a joint meal out in the courtyard back when this was still allowed because it wasn't COVID, and then all of a sudden the meal goes so long it's now Shabbos. So do they make an eruv? So the answer is we say that they can rely on the fact that the food on the table is considered to unify them all because it's their eruv. And some say that the way it works is because of shituf, right? Not eruv chaterot, because of shituf mavo'ot. So Amar Rabba, and Rabba says it's not really an argument. Below pliki, kan masud and BAYT, kan masud machatzer. No, they're not actually arguing. The question is, where are they eating? If they're eating in the house, that means that the way that the unification of the areas is working is by means of eruv chaterot. But if they're eating in the courtyard, then it would need to be unified via shituf mevo'ot, because again, if we say it has to be one level more private than the intended collective unit. So Amar le Abai le Rabba. So Abai says, Rabba, I can support you about the fact that about the varying domains. That Tanya Messiah. Here's the right that helps you. That Eruvin chatzer b'chatzer, v'shitufei mavot b'mavoi. Right. That we use Eruv ve'chatzerot to combine courtyards, and we use shituf mavo'ot to combine a mavoi. What do we mean that when we say that you use an eruv chatzerot in the courtyard? But didn't we say that you can't actually place your eruv chatzerot in the courtyard itself? Rather, what is this teaching us? This is all talking about the case of we use the title of chatzer, but we don't mean the chatzer. We mean a house adjacent to the chatzer, or we mean for the mav. So we mean the courtyard adjacent to the mavoi. So it's teaching us that each time it means one level down from the level of privacy of the item of the area that you are making a joint communal space. Just saying that you have to bear that in mind when doing so. Okay, so again, just to summarize the section that we've been talking about, it was the question of at what point were we allowed to place items. So we said that it has to be, again, if you want to place an eruv chatzerot, it has to be placed in a place where somebody could be living. Again, it's one level down from the chatzer in order to join it all to being one large shared courtyard. Similarly, if you want to combine the alleyways, it has to be placed into a courtyard, which is one level down, because it has to be more protected than the area that you're trying to make it into. Okay, and tomorrow we will continue on from the two dots here of Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Okay. All right.
Have a good day.
Have a good day, everybody. Take care.
All right, thank you.
Okay.